right now at 6.
They're storming the barricades. They're storming the Capitol.
Here we go!
We will never give up. We will never concede.
The Capitol under siege.
At this hour, our democracy is under unprecedented assault.
I've never seen anything like this here in all my years of covering Washington, D.C.
One person shot after protesters breached the building, putting a halt to an historic day.
But you have to go home now. We have to have peace.
Congress goes from counting the votes that would declare Joe Biden the election winner to sheltering in place while thousands outside protest.
They have run up the stairs here at the U.S. Capitol. They have pushed through the Capitol Police.
National Guard troops now head to the scene as a curfew takes effect.
The behavior that we are witnessing is shameful, unpatriotic, and above all, it is unlawful. There will be law and order, and this behavior will not be tolerated.
We'll have live team coverage. News 4 starts now.
We're coming on the air this evening as darkness falls on the Capitol, with American democracy under siege and a curfew on the streets of our city taking effect right now. All this as President Trump's supporters attempt to halt the peaceful transition of power by storming the Capitol building, a siege that has resulted in at least one death.
And a scene that we never imagined seeing at our U.S. Capitol here in Washington, D.C. Moments ago, we saw security forces use flashbang grenades on the west side of the Capitol, where the inauguration will take place in 2 weeks from today. An effort to dislodge the protesters who took up residence in the area where President-elect Joe Biden will be inaugurated.
This all began as Congress set out to approve Biden's presidential victory. Pro-Trump supporters stormed inside the Capitol complex. Everyone who works in the building was forced to shelter in place as Capitol Police tried to restore order with the help of additional security forces. President-elect Biden condemned the violence this afternoon.
Our democracy is under unprecedented assault, unlike anything we've seen in modern times. An assault on the citadel of liberty, the Capitol. An assault on the people's representatives, on the Capitol Hill police, sworn to protect them, on the public servants who work at the heart of our republic. The scenes of chaos at the Capitol do not reflect a true America. What we're seeing are a small number of extremists dedicated to lawlessness. This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition. The words of a president matter. At their best, the words of a president can inspire. At their worst, they can incite.
Mr. Biden called on the president to go on television to end the siege. The president did not do that. Instead, he released a video on Twitter repeating his false claims about the election and also telling protesters to go home. We welcome you into this unprecedented day in American history. We want you to stay safe, stay where you are, and we'll get through this together.
It's going to be a long night, but home is where you want to be. As we mentioned, a curfew has just taken effect here in the district, 6 o'clock. Now Alexandria and Arlington have joined in, also issuing curfews.
Also breaking, we've learned a person shot by law enforcement inside the Capitol building today has now died. We're still working to determine the circumstances of how it happened.
The National Guard and law enforcement agencies across our greater Washington region have now been called in to help with the situation, which is still not under control at this hour.
We've got a whole team of reporters covering all the angles on this story. We begin with news for Shamari Stone. He is live on the east side of the Capitol, where those protesters first breached the Capitol building several hours ago. Shamari, what are you seeing there right now?
Well, right now you can see these military-type vehicles arriving here at the Capitol. We are on the Senate side right now, and if you come right over here, you guys, let me show you. You see this barrier right here? This is a barrier to keep people away, and these Prince George's County police officers with shields, batons, protective gear, are here to make sure that people do not get close to the Capitol. You can see these gentlemen working here right now. Now, let me show you. This all started earlier today with a barrier similar to this one right here. You had the Trump supporters who were here, and they gathered and they were angry after the president finished his speech by the ellipse. They came here and knocked down this particular barriers like the ones you see here, and then that is when they stormed over to the steps on the east side of the Capitol. They ran up the steps, they went through a line that the U.S. Capitol Police had made, and then when they got up to the top, that is when some of them were able to get inside of the Capitol. The Capitol Police used a flashbang to move people back. Some people moved back, but they remained on the actual steps. Very angry about what happened with this election. Now, keep in mind, as you all stated at the top of the show, a woman has died after being shot by law enforcement at the Capitol. Sources tell NBC News, and at least 5 people were taken to the hospital. Now, throughout these live shots that we have done throughout this evening, at one point something also disturbing happened where you had the media gathered near the Senate side of the Capitol, and they had all of their gear, you know, their tripods, which used to keep the camera still. Cameras, expensive equipment, exercising their First Amendment rights, letting people know about what's going on today. And that is when the Trump rioters blasted through the barrier that the media had, started yelling, and I quote, "You are the enemy of the people," end quote, something that Trump frequently says, and in fact said today when he spoke by the ellipse. And that is when they started chasing out the reporters and stomping on that expensive equipment. I've never seen anything like this in my 20-year news career, and it was very disturbing to see. But right now you can see right here outside the Capitol, there's a man actually engaging with the police, as you can see right there, dressed in a gray hoodie and sweatpants, despite there being a curfew that Mayor Muriel Bowser has enacted at the top of this show at 6 o'clock. This guy is still here, and he is talking, yelling at times at the officers here. That is the very latest, and we will continue to bring you updates. Oh, just one more thing I just found out. Let me come over here, Brooks Merriweather. Let's show our viewers. You see those buses right over there?
Yeah.
See that bus right over there? It's white.
Yes.
There's buses that came here, and that is the National Guard. They have arrived here at the Capitol, and they are also working with police to make sure that they keep the Trump rioters away from destroying this building here.
Much needed reinforcements. All right, Shamari Stone, stay safe out there. We want to go to the west side now. There was a lot of activity about 15, 20 minutes ago. Bullhorns, police also wearing shields. They were herding hundreds of rioters onto First Street. Mark Seagraves, what's the situation where you are now?
Well, things are getting a bit more tense, Jim. We can tell you that the police who have formed this line here between First Street and the West Lawn have just been ordered to put on their gas masks, an indicator that they may be getting ready to deploy chemical irritants or some type of gas to disperse the crowd that is remaining. The crowd that still remains here is small but vocal, very confrontational. We have not seen any physical confrontations, but only verbal confrontations thus far. But again, all of these officers who you see over my shoulder just minutes ago put on their gas masks. We see officers who have the devices that they use to deploy the gas at the ready. We're anticipating that at any time they could give the order to disperse or face arrest. This is the orders that they have been given in the past to the crowd. The crowd has been ignoring those orders thus far. But again, the vast majority of people have cleared out in the past 2 hours. We still have handfuls of people here, still angry, still confrontational. But again, nothing physical yet. But police are poised to deploy gas. We can see them with their gas masks on now here. This again on the west side of the Capitol, right at First Street. Jim?
Safety, as you talk about the police officers getting ready to put on gas masks, are you prepared if there's gas around you, and are you safe where you are?
You know, I can tell you during our last live shot, anyone who was watching, things got a little bit scary for us as a crowd came into us and started threatening us. We do feel safe, and we are ready to leave as soon as things got unsafe for us. But right now, there are more police around us than there are rioters or protesters. So things are safe here, but tense because, again, the threat of using gas on this crowd seems imminent.
All right, any new activity, please let us know, and we will bring you right back up live. Mark Seagraves on the west side of the Capitol.
We go to another part of downtown now. Corey Smith has been reporting from the area right around Black Lives Matter Plaza, right up the street from the White House, and things have been a little tense there in the last hour or so. What's happening right now, Corey?
Well, it really feels like the situation, the atmosphere right outside Black Lives Matter Plaza changes every 5 or 10 minutes or so. I'm going to step out of the way. The line of police officers that I showed you the last time we were live is now gone. They have moved out of the intersection of 16th and I Street, which is for the majority of the day served as a kind of thoroughfare for Trump supporters. And that's where we have seen a lot of the confrontations take place now that night has fallen. I think we may have some video from the most recent scuffle that we had out here that we can show you. That involved pro-Trump folks, anti-Trump folks, coming together. Pepper spray, or what appeared to be pepper spray, was deployed. The police had to rush in and break things up. This is precisely what we heard Mayor Bowser talk about in that press conference when she talked about the behavior of some of these folks today at the Capitol building here in Black Lives Matter Plaza. Her emotions obviously running high, just like everyone else in the district. Let's take a listen to what she had to say just moments ago.
I continue to urge all Washingtonians to stay home and stay calm. And if you see something, say something. But above all, stay home. The behavior that we are witnessing is shameful, unpatriotic, and above all, it is unlawful. Anyone who has engaged in these activities, continues to engage in these activities, will be held accountable. There will be law and order, and this behavior will not be tolerated. The Metropolitan Police Department has been deployed to assist the United States Capitol Police in restoring order to the Capitol.
A riot was declared. It was clear that the crowd was intent on causing harm to our officers by deploying chemical irritants on police to force entry into the United States Capitol building. As you are aware, they were able to gain access to the Capitol building, and I can confirm that one civilian was reported to have sustained a gunshot wound inside of the Capitol. I know that many of you are familiar with the Metropolitan Police Department. Understand that there is no better agency in the country to handle First Amendment events. They happen on a regular basis here in our city. However, today's events were not representation of peaceful protests. Today, what we witnessed was unlawful, riotous behavior. And people that come to our city engaged in unlawful behavior will be held accountable.
Now, of course, it's this behavior that Mayor Bowser and Chief Conte are so concerned about. And really, the threat is this. There are people wearing camouflage, helmets, tactical gear. It's really hard to tell if somebody's just a normal citizen or if they are some sort of law enforcement. Those are the folks who busted out that pepper spray that led up to that fight. And so it's really just hard to tell who has what and what their intentions are. And obviously the concern with night falling here on Black Lives Matter Plaza is that we could see a repeat of what we saw last night when pro-Trump supporters were clashing with police trying to make their way onto the plaza. The hope is that will not happen tonight. And again, as we heard Mayor Bowser say, she wants D.C. residents to stay home. That is the safest place that they can be tonight. Hopefully things remain peaceful as the night goes on. But that is the latest here at BLM Plaza. We'll send it back to you all in the studio.
All right, here we are about 12 minutes into that curfew. Now, we mentioned from the Chief Conte there, talked about someone being shot in the Capitol, a civilian, by law enforcement. That person has, in fact, died now.
At the end of an extraordinary and chaotic day in the history of our country, we've seen an assault on our democracy like we've never seen.
Today is not the end, it's just the beginning. We will never give up. We will never concede.
They have run up the stairs here at the U.S. Capitol. They have pushed through the Capitol Police.
Hey, he's got a gun! He's got a gun!
This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition.
I never thought I would see a day like this in America.
To those who wreaked havoc in our capital today, you did not win.
As we turn into the evening, the attitude here is one of resolve.
This temple to democracy was desecrated.
Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are lawfully elected. It is over.
Where there is despair, let us bring hope.
It has been an unforgettable day in Washington and for all Americans. We're looking live tonight at Capitol Hill with our city now under a strict curfew and our democracy forever changed.
Tonight, police lines remain, but most of the rioters we saw storming the seat of our government have gone. We thank you for inviting us into your homes on a truly difficult day. I'm Jim Adler.
And I'm Doreen Gensler. We've known for weeks that today could be chaotic, but none of us imagined anything like this. The streets around the Capitol and all over D.C. now quiet after Mayor Bowser ordered a 12-hour curfew that started at 6 p.m. And a short time ago, she ordered a state of public emergency be extended for 15 days to run through Inauguration Day, allowing her to implement a curfew at any time.
That we saw unprecedented attack on our American democracy incited by the United States president, and he must be held accountable. His constant and divisive rhetoric led to the abhorrent actions we saw today. And sadly, it led to a loss of life that will forever stain what could have been and what should have been a peaceful transfer of power.
At the White House tonight, at least 2 staffers have resigned in the wake of those pro-Trump rioters storming the Capitol, resulting, as you heard the mayor say, in one woman's death today. Democrats accuse the president of inciting the violence, and some are calling for him to be removed from office before the Constitution forces him out in 14 days.
On the floor of the House right now, lawmakers are still working to finalize what is normally nothing more than a formality, counting the Electoral College votes. The leaders of the House and Senate emotional about the breach of those sacred halls today.
The United States and the United States Congress have faced down much greater threats than the unhinged crowd we saw today. They tried to disrupt our democracy. They failed.
Today, January 6th, is the Feast of the Epiphany. On this day of revelation, let us pray that this instigation to violence will provide an epiphany for our country to heal.
Let's take you back live outside the Capitol tonight with News 4's Shamari Stone.
Shamari, you were in those crowds throughout the day today. Tell us what you've seen and what's going on there right now.
Well, right now, the U.S. Capitol is secure, according to Capitol Police, who put up this barrier right here. This is an example of the barrier that the Trump rioters were able to breach, and they then went over to the steps right over there. There was a line of U.S. Capitol Police, and they pushed right through and got access to the Capitol that you're looking at right now. Now, we were here when they breached the barrier and caused a riot.
USA!
Angry Trump rioters pushed through outnumbered U.S. Capitol Police officers. They storm up the front steps of the Capitol, and some are able to get inside. D.C. police say rioters used chemical irritants on police in order to gain access to the Capitol grounds. People pour water on their eyes to flush out the burning sensation. They wanted to stop the peaceful transfer of power, forcing lawmakers to be rushed from the building, interrupting challenges to Joe Biden's Electoral College victory. Moments later, these guys shattered glass on a door, and you can hear a shot fired. A woman died after being shot by law enforcement at the Capitol, and several officers and others were injured. Back outside, a mob of Trump rioters chase reporters away from the Capitol and destroy their video equipment. Now, Mayor Bowser says that the rioters will be held accountable. Now, right now, you have the U.S. the U.S. Capitol Police. You have all the different authorities here, and their job is to prevent people from breaching this barrier here and gaining access to the Capitol. I'm Shamari Stone. Back to you.
Good work out there today. Shamari, thank you.
We're working to learn more about the woman who was shot and killed inside the Capitol today. Law enforcement officials say she was shot by a Capitol police officer, but the circumstances that led to the shooting are not entirely clear. The woman's identity has not been released yet.
There are an awful lot of questions over where the D.C. National Guard was in the immediate hours after that violent mob stormed the Capitol.
News 4's Jackie Benson continues our live team coverage from the D.C. Armory with some answers. Jackie?
Well, we know that the D.C. National Guard now on the streets of D.C. Take a look here, though. These are buses that I believe brought several hundred members of Maryland's National Guard here this evening, and we understand Virginia National Guard troops are also on the way. Now, as to that delay, the New York Times reporting tonight that it was Vice President Mike Pence and not President Trump who authorized the use of the D.C. National Guard. Members of the D.C. National Guard in riot gear formed a line to push insurrectionist rioters who had stormed the U.S. Capitol off the grounds. Unlike the governors of states, the district's chief executive must have authorization from the President of the United States in order to deploy the National Guard. At an afternoon press conference, the Secretary of the Army indicated there had been some type of delay in that process.
A lot of questions were asked, a little bit of confusion. But as we worked through it, we ultimately made the determination about a half hour later to mobilize the entire D.C. National Guard.
The first D.C. National Guard troops did not leave the D.C. Armory. You can see them in this bus convoy until about 5:30 p.m., hours after the innermost security of the Capitol was breached. It was a sharp contrast to the night of June 1st, 2020, when D.C. National Guard helicopters were requested by the Trump administration. They hovered over thousands, staging a peaceful protest following the death of George Floyd at the hands of police in Minneapolis. The maneuver became a subject of a Department of Defense investigation. That same night, National Guard troops were stationed at street corners in downtown D.C. as D.C. police made controversial mass arrests of protesters. And most of those mass arrests that night of June 1st were for violation of the curfew that went into effect that night. Live at the National Guard Armory, Jackie Benson, News 4.
Jackie, thank you. A curfew is also in effect tonight in Arlington and Alexandria. Virginia Governor Ralph Northam gave that order following a request from local leaders today. You can see the empty streets. The governor issued a state of emergency and sent state troopers and the Virginia National Guard to D.C. Chopper 4 caught video of Virginia state troopers on the move this evening. Northam and Maryland Governor Larry Hogan condemned the riots today.
To have an armed insurrection occur in our nation's capital is just something that we should all, Democrats, Republicans, all of us should find unacceptable.
I never thought I would see a day like this in America. All Americans should be outraged by this attack on our nation's capital.
Governor Hogan sent 500 National Guard members today and 200 state troopers to D.C.
New tonight, the acting D.C. police chief just gave us an update on today's riots and protests. He says 3 people died from what appeared to have been medical emergencies in the chaos today. The chief also tells us officers have made 47 curfew violation arrests. D.C. Fire and EMS says it took 14 people to the hospital, including the woman who was killed. We're also getting new information about pipe bombs spotted earlier today. The FBI now says the devices were rendered safe. We have a picture of one of them that you can see here. One of the bombs was detonated at Republican National Committee headquarters. The other was found at the Democratic National Committee headquarters. Those 2 buildings are just blocks away from the Capitol. Tonight, with the Capitol secured, Congress is working with renewed purpose.
Right now, the two chambers are back to counting the electoral votes that will solidify Joe Biden as the next president.
You're looking live at a picture on the floor of the U.S. House. It is going to be a long night. The Senate has rejected the challenge to Arizona's count, but the House won't finish that vote until around midnight, and there will still be 46 more states to go.
Before everybody got back to work this evening, sharp words from Utah Republican Senator Mitt Romney, placing the blame for today's riots squarely on President Trump.
Now we gather due to a selfish man's injured pride and the outrage of supporters who he has deliberately misinformed for the past 2 months and stirred to action this very morning. What happened here today was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States.
Because of today's riots, with 2 weeks left in Trump's term, Democratic lawmakers are calling for the president to be removed from office before January 20th, either through impeachment or by invoking the 25th Amendment.
The job of addressing the nation about the chaos at the Capitol fell to President-elect Joe Biden today. He canceled a speech on the economy and spoke forcefully about the siege.
Our democracy is under an unprecedented assault, unlike anything we've seen in modern times. An assault on the citadel of liberty, the Capitol. This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition. It's not protest. It's insurrection. The words of a president matter. At their best, the words of a president can inspire. At their worst, they can incite.
Mr. Biden called on the president to go on television today to end the siege. The president did not. Instead, he released this video repeating his false claims about the election and telling the protesters to go home. That message and other appeals to the rioters forced Twitter to block his account for the next 12 hours. He's also been blocked now by Facebook and Instagram. Erica Gonzalez continues our coverage now from the newsroom with what led up to that moment. Erica?
Hi, Jim. Well, the chaos we witnessed today went on for 2 hours before President Trump urged his supporters to stop. And we're going to take you through a timeline of the events. At 1:11 p.m., the president's speech to supporters on the ellipse ended. In his remarks, he urged people to march to the Capitol and said, quote, "You will never take back our country with weakness." His supporters appear to have heeded those words. Then, less than an hour later, at 2:07 p.m., a mob knocked down guardrails and violently stormed the East Capitol steps. 17 minutes later, Mr. Trump criticized his own vice president, tweeting that Mike Pence didn't have the, quote, courage to do what needed to be done today. He again made false claims of election fraud. We go now to 2:38 p.m. This is nearly 30 minutes after the initial breach, and President Trump, for the first time, tells his supporters to stay peaceful, but does not tell them to stand down. Minutes later, both the House and the Senate floors were forced into lockdown as rioters made their way into the chambers themselves. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, gunshots were heard inside the Capitol. That was when a woman was shot by law enforcement, and she later died. It wasn't for another half hour at 3:36 p.m. that the White House finally announced that the National Guard had been activated. At 4:06, President-elect Joe Biden spoke, calling the scene at the Capitol an unprecedented assault on democracy and urging the president to address the nation and call for an end to the violence. Instead, Jim, as you mentioned, the president tweeted a video message at 4:17 p.m. with more than 2 hours after the police line was initially breached. And in that video, he did encourage people to go home, but he also continued to make false statements about the election being stolen. And as we now know, that video and a few other tweets have been removed. Jim and Doreen, back over to you.
All right, so much damage done by then. All right, Erica, thank you.
We have much more to come here at 11. Leon Harris is standing by with some of the unforgettable images from this afternoon, and Scott McFarland will join us with some of his expertise on Capitol Hill.
Right now, here's an early look at tomorrow's Washington Post front page. The headline, Trump mob storms Capitol. Stay with us. We're back in less than 90 seconds.
Today's events were not representation of peaceful protests. Today, what we witnessed was unlawful, riotous behavior. And people that come to our city engaged in unlawful behavior will be held accountable.
Right now at 6.
And I wish we could say we couldn't see it coming. But that isn't true.
The urgent questions surrounding security failures at the Capitol after a mob of pro-Trump supporters takes over the building.
The investigation into how it was allowed to happen.
And why this response was so different than ones in the past.
New details on the tactics investigators are using to identify the rioters who stormed the chambers.
We still have a significant amount of work ahead of us to identify and hold each and every one of the violent mob accountable.
Plus, the growing calls to remove Trump from office.
Remove this president by immediately invoking the 25th Amendment.
And what's happening now to make sure the inauguration is safe?
And where does Washington go from here?
Hopeful that this brings to the surface some of the deep challenges that we face and have to address.
Live team coverage starts now.
Live right now at 6, darkness has fallen over Washington 24 hours after a mob incited by President Trump took over our seat of government.
They created chaos, but they failed to overturn the will of the people. It'll go down as an infamous day in the nation's capital, and one that could have been much, much worse. Welcome into News 4 at 6 this evening, everyone. I'm Leon Harris.
And I'm Doreen Gensler. Tonight, Washington's acting U.S. attorney says he will consider bringing charges against anyone who incited yesterday's mob attack, including President Trump himself.
Overnight, Congress signed off on the Electoral College vote count. President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris will be inaugurated January 20th. The state of emergency in D.C. has been extended through the 20th. The National Guard has been mobilized for 30 days, and thousands of additional reinforcements are on the way. 4 people have died, including a woman who was shot and killed inside the Capitol. More than 60 have been arrested. And there are growing questions about why Capitol Police were not better prepared for the attack on our democracy.
And amid growing concern about President Trump's efforts to block the peaceful transfer of power, today the most powerful social media company in the world banned President Trump indefinitely. This as President-elect Biden blames the president for the attack.
The past 4 years, we've had a president who's made his contempt for our democracy, our Constitution, the rule of law clear in everything he has done. He unleashed an all-out assault on our institutions of our democracy from the outset. And yesterday was but the culmination of that unrelenting attack.
We'll be digging into every angle of this story today and for weeks and months to come.
That's for sure. Our team coverage begins with Mark Seagraves and new information on the public safety angle. Mark, there's already been some fallout on the Capitol security staff. Tell us about it.
That's right. The House Sergeant-at-Arms has resigned under pressure from Speaker Pelosi, who is also calling for the chief of the U.S. Capitol Police to step down after what many people are calling a security failure here at the U.S. Capitol. We've seen New Jersey State Police show up. D.C. Police are staged right over there. Virginia State Police are staged right over there. And all this will be in place throughout Inauguration Day. A riot was declared inside the U.S. Capitol by D.C. police yesterday after hundreds of angry demonstrators breached the Capitol and forced their way inside, where a U.S. Capitol police officer shot and killed one of the rioters. Outside, a crowd of thousands surrounded the U.S. Capitol, hundreds climbing on scaffolding and the inaugural stage.
What happened yesterday is textbook terrorism.
Police eventually used flashbangs and chemical irritants to force the crowd off the Capitol grounds. Where the two sides faced off last night, there is now a 7-foot non-scalable fence being installed that will encircle the entire U.S. Capitol grounds, and thousands of National Guard troops from across the region are being sent to D.C.
There will be 6,200 guardsmen in total by the weekend here. These personnel and this security measures will be in place for no less than the next 30 days.
As for the failure by U.S. Capitol Police and federal authorities to keep the U.S. Capitol safe, D.C.'s police chief says once the Capitol Police asked for help, D.C. police came to their aid.
What we did do was restore democracy. There was no intelligence that suggested there would be a breach of the U.S. Capitol.
The chief of the U.S. Capitol Police issued this statement saying the Capitol Police had a robust plan established to address anticipated First Amendment activities. But make no mistake, these mass riots were not First Amendment activities. They were criminal, riotous behavior. The Secretary of the Army also told reporters there was no intelligence suggesting a riot could break out inside the U.S. Capitol.
Had no wildest imagination that you could end up breaching the Capitol grounds.
There was already one arrest here this morning. Now, Leon and Doreen, we can tell you that at least 13 people were arrested inside the Capitol and are now facing federal charges. Nearly 70 people were arrested outside on the grounds for violating the mayor's curfew order. That's the very latest here from the U.S. Capitol. Back to you.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Mark Seagraves reporting live.
New documents from the Justice Department show that rioters didn't just come to protest the election, they came to cause harm. The DOJ says one person arrested near the Capitol yesterday had 11 Molotov cocktails ready to go. Investigators also found 2 pipe bombs, one outside the Republican National Committee headquarters and another outside the Democratic National Committee headquarters. Both were safely defused. Many more items were stolen from the U.S. Capitol, including national security records. The U.S. Capitol Police are dealing with the fallout and the damage to their reputation. As News 4's Scott McFarland reports now, despite all the questions, police are only offering a few answers.
While defending the U.S. House and Senate, Capitol Police were also forced to defend themselves. 3 congressional and police sources tell News 4 at least 60 officers suffered injuries. At least one of them is in critical condition. And from seemingly every corner of the Capitol today came calls to investigate what went wrong. How did a 2,300-person police force with a $500 million a year budget and early warnings of trouble let this group take control of the U.S. Capitol?
Everybody felt like we were in a bad situation when they're, beating on the doors, and they ask you to get to the ground, and because there could be shots, fired.
The head of a national organization of federal law enforcement officers tells News 4 the images from yesterday indicate the officers were outnumbered.
These officers should have been in full riot gear.
The U.S. House Appropriations Committee today announced it will launch a review of what went wrong, and that committee controls the police department's budget and has oversight. Recent investigations by our News 4i team showed growing pressure on the agency before yesterday. A 75% spike in threats against members of Congress just since 2017. And this warning from the agency's internal inspector general in summer 2019, alerting the police department of challenges in protecting and securing the complex, and citing issues with the budget, with recruitment, and with training. The agency's police chief, who's less than a year into his position, did not answer questions in the first 24 hours after this crisis. The chief issued a written statement saying the agency had a robust plan, called the actions of officers heroic, and said there would be a review of the incident.
The Capitol Police is far too secretive, acts like a force unto itself, and that's one of the matters that needs to be investigated.
The Capitol Police answer to Congress itself. The best chance of getting clear answers would come from a congressional hearing, but Congress is recessed until at least Inauguration Day, which means answers won't come for days, if not weeks or months. Scott McFarland, News 4.
And we're just getting some breaking news about all this. A spokesperson for the Capitol Police says Capitol Police Chief Sund is resigning from the job that he's just started over the summer. His resignation takes effect January 16th, so right before the inauguration. Leon?
Doreen, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan says that President Trump is a threat to the American people. Earlier today, he gave an update on Maryland's help in securing the Capitol after yesterday's siege. But when he was asked about President Trump's involvement in the attack, he said this.
I think there's no question that America would be better off if the president would resign or be removed from office, and if Mike Pence, the Vice President of the United States, would conduct a peaceful transition of power over the next 13 days until President Biden is sworn in.
Governor Hogan went on to say that Maryland will continue to assist the district with security through the inauguration. Now, just within the hour, the White House press secretary made her first public statements on the attack. Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany appeared in the White House briefing room, and she made a statement that lasted less than 2 minutes, saying, quote, the entire White House condemns yesterday's violence and is committed to a peaceful transition, end quote. She did not take any questions. The statement comes amid obvious signs of a White House in turmoil this evening. Alice Barr joining us now live to break it all down. Alice, what's the latest?
Leon, President Trump's days in the White House are limited, but right now his power is not. And that is leading to this sudden and serious effort to try to push him out of office early.
Growing pressure today to hold President Trump accountable for urging on his supporters before an angry mob stormed the Capitol and then not condemning them afterwards. Top Democratic leaders calling for Vice President Mike Pence to assume the Oval Office under the 25th Amendment or through impeachment.
He must be removed from office. While it's only 13 days left, any day can be a horror show for America.
Even some Republicans now say President Trump should not be allowed to wield the powers of the presidency in his final days in office.
The president is unfit and the president is unwell.
Early this morning, President Trump finally committed to an orderly transition of power through a tweet from a White House aide, Twitter having frozen the president's account and Facebook locking him out indefinitely. The statement came minutes after Congress finished counting the electoral votes, affirming President-elect Joe Biden's victory. Biden today squarely blaming President Trump for the chaos at the Capitol.
He unleashed an all-out assault on our institutions of our democracy from the outset. And yesterday was but the culmination of that unrelenting attack.
Several Trump administration officials resigning in protest to the president's handling of the crisis, including Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao, wife of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and Special Envoy to Northern Ireland Mick Mulvaney.
But I can't stay here, not after yesterday.
Former Attorney General William Barr accused the president of, quote, orchestrating a mob to pressure Congress, calling it a betrayal.
And in another sign of the apparent break between President Trump and Vice President Mike Pence, NBC News is learning that those around the vice president are encouraging him to go to the inauguration for Joe Biden. And we're being told that if Vice President Pence were invited, that he would attend the inauguration, something President Trump is not planning to do. Back to you, Leon.
All right, you got it. Thanks, Alice. Alice Barr reporting from the White House.
For a lot of people who live and work in the district every day, watching what happened yesterday was especially awful, almost like a home invasion. Corey Smith continues our coverage now. He talked with people today who are still trying to comprehend what happened in our city. Corey?
Yeah, Doreen, home invasion is right. A lot of folks we spoke to said they felt violated. Yeah, D.C. can seem a world away to some people, but if you live here, if you raise your kids here, the attack on the Capitol Wednesday felt personal.
I ain't never seen nothing like this in my life.
It's left an indelible mark in, the lives of everybody here.
The storming of the U.S. Capitol was an attack on democracy, an attack on the people's house, and for those who live in the district, an attack on our home.
As neighbors of the national government and those who work in the federal government, we take pride in that, and we are especially hurt by the treatment.
Images of the chaos were broadcast around the world, but as Louisa Spofford and Marcel Caldwell watched from home, something felt different.
This is home for us, so at the end of the day, I think, it's not, it means a lot more as opposed to somebody who's just coming and going, but we all can agree that it's a horrible event.
For people who spend time walking around the Capitol and just see the building every day and really look up to it, I think it's really disheartening.
For some, yesterday was no fluke. They've watched the violence build since November and December when groups like the Proud Boys roamed D.C. streets, inciting violence and damaging property.
As somebody who works there as well, it's, to see your place of business, somewhere that you commute to every day and pass, as you're a public servant, it's really sad to see.
As we move towards Inauguration Day, tension is rising. And after Wednesday's security breach, calls to make D.C. the 51st state are growing too.
This reflects, further emphasizes the need for D.C. to have sovereignty over its activities within this area. And it is time for D.C. statehood.
And as the district braces for the days ahead, some are optimistic that in the aftermath of something so terrible, something good could actually come of this.
Hopeful that this brings to the surface some of the deep challenges that we face and have to address.
Now, the boost or the push for D.C. statehood got a major boost earlier this week when Democrats took those 2 Senate seats in Georgia. But make no mistake, it still faces an uphill battle in this building. But speaking to Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton earlier today, she says after Wednesday, this isn't about politics, it's about protecting people.
News 4 at 11 starts now.
First up at 11, a highly secured U.S. Capitol building now guarded by extra police, National Guard troops, and new fencing all around.
The new barriers reinforced tonight, now protecting the site of Joe Biden's inauguration, but they come far too late for the mob that invaded the U.S. Capitol yesterday. And now we have learned tonight 3 top security officials have resigned. Good evening, I'm Jim Adley.
I'm Doreen Gensler. Calls are growing louder tonight to remove President Trump from office for inciting the violence. But talk of the 25th Amendment and impeachment is still mostly coming from Democrats.
The president released a new video tonight calling what happened at the Capitol heinous. He also conceded defeat in the election for the first time today, saying a new administration will be inaugurated on January 20th.
And under mounting criticism of the failed response, the Capitol Police Chief, Stephen Sund, resigned effective a few days before the inauguration. Also stepping down the sergeants at arms for both the House and the Senate. We have team coverage again tonight. We start with News 4's Jackie Benson. Jackie?
Doreen, still unanswered tonight, the question of how U.S. Capitol Police could have so miscalculated the risk assessment of an insurrection that was planned in plain sight on social media.
The after action report is something that generally almost every department across the United States engages in after a significant event, how the whole matter was handled. The good aspects, the bad aspects, what could be done better, what could be done differently.
Former U.S. Capitol Police Chief Kim Dine watched, along with the rest of the world, as hundreds of supporters of President Trump marched from a rally near the White House and became a mob that assaulted the most secure parts of the U.S. Capitol. In a scathing statement, the U.S. Capitol Police Officers Union faulted the agency's preparation, comparing it to First Amendment protests by Black Lives Matter supporters last summer. Quote, June protest planning saw the coordinated response of U.S. Capitol Police, the D.C. National Guard, the Metropolitan Police, and others, which successfully safeguarded the entire Capitol complex. D.C. police have released images of rioters being sought in connection with the assault on the Capitol, most for unlawful entry, some facing more serious charges for possession of weapons and pipe bombs. Many question why they were not arrested while still on Capitol grounds. Dine remains proud of the men and women of his former agency, but he says he worries about the political climate that he believes fueled every aspect of Wednesday's debacle.
This rhetoric, this national rhetoric from the highest levels of those in authority and power has to stop, because it makes the job of the police officers across this country, both local and federal, much more difficult.
Yesterday's events are also now the subject of an investigation by the House Appropriations Committee. Back to you.
All right, Jackie Benson live for us on the Hill. Jackie, thank you. You mentioned those pipe bombs. We have some breaking news for you now from the FBI. Our first picture of a person wanted for questioning about those pipe bombs that were found yesterday at the headquarters of the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee, both near the Capitol grounds. The FBI is now offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to an arrest.
More than 24 hours after the riots that Mayor Bowser called textbook terrorism, the scars are still visible inside our Capitol. Window frames are beaten in. There are boards now where rioters smashed their way inside. Glass still on the floor this afternoon. All of it an eerie snapshot of the destruction we watched unfold yesterday. But tonight, outside the Capitol, things already look a lot different. News 4's Shamari Stone is live with some of the security changes that are now in place.
Well, good evening, Doreen. Standing out here on Constitution Avenue on the side of the U.S. Capitol, and take a look right here. You can see this 7-foot fence. I'm 6'2", and you can see how high it is. And I must tell you, to bring it a little closer, Brooks, Meriwether, let's show them. You can see my fingers here, and it's very hard to scale this fence. It's these sharp edges, and it really hurts your fingers, and it would be difficult also with gloves. Let's show them this right over here. Look at this bolt. So you have this bolt that is connecting each individual fence, bringing it together. There's one here, there's one on the top. And some people I talk to tell me, why wasn't this here yesterday? They put it up today. Wouldn't it have been good to have it here yesterday to prevent the chaos that unfolded here at the Capitol? This is difficult to scale. Crews tied in thick bolts, connecting the 7-foot security fence, as National Guard members stand behind it. After they finished the final installment, U.S. Capitol Police told us there was an emergency situation.
So stay in this area, and once we get it, when you hear it all clear, if you could just let them know.
They searched streets around the Capitol and then told us all is clear. The heightened sense of security comes a day after the angry pro-Trump rioters pushed their way inside, forcing Congress to stop counting electoral college votes, affirming Joe Biden as president-elect. Dozens have been arrested. 4 people died in and around the Capitol grounds. And tonight, the Secret Service released a written statement just basically saying that the inauguration will be secure. Live here at the U.S. Capitol, I'm Shamari Stone, News 4.
All right, Shamari, thank you.
Now to the growing calls tonight from Democrats for President Trump to be removed from office.
For the first time, the president has acknowledged his defeat, but his change of tune is not slowing the momentum to potentially force him out.
President-elect Joe Biden and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi condemned Mr. Trump earlier today.
We've had a president who's made his contempt for our democracy, our Constitution, the rule of law clear.
In calling for this seditious act, the President has committed an unspeakable assault on our nation and our people.
Speaker Pelosi says if Vice President Pence does not invoke the 25th Amendment, Democrats could impeach the president again.
NBC's Alice Barr continues our live team coverage with more fallout tonight, including another cabinet resignation. Alice?
Doreen and Jim, that's right. Another one added to the list. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos now resigning, and she had some harsh words for the president. So he's really seeing kind of the walls closing in on all sides. You have critics who are trying to push him out of office early. You have some of his closest allies backing away. And amid all of that, tonight, President Trump coming perhaps the closest that he will to conceding the election.
With harsh criticism and pointed accusations mounting about President Trump's role in inciting the violence at the U.S. Capitol, tonight he released a video on Twitter with a starkly different tone. The president acknowledging for the first time that he will not serve a second term in office.
A new administration will be inaugurated on January 20th. My focus now turns to ensuring a smooth, orderly, and seamless transition of power.
President Trump condemned what he called lawless mayhem at the Capitol, but took no responsibility for falsely telling his supporters for weeks that the election was stolen and urging them to fight to keep him in office. Several Trump administration officials resigning in protest over the president's handling of the crisis, including Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, who blamed and shamed President Trump, saying our children are watching. Top Democratic leaders calling for Vice President Mike Pence to assume the Oval Office under the 25th Amendment or through impeachment.
He must be removed from office. While it's only 13 days left, any day can be a horror show for America.
Even some Republicans now agree.
The president is unfit and the president is unwell.
President-elect Joe Biden today squarely blaming President Trump for the chaos at the Capitol.
He unleashed an all-out assault on our institutions of our democracy from the outset. And yesterday was but the culmination of that unrelenting attack.
Biden calling for calm 13 days before his inauguration on the Capitol grounds that yesterday looked like a battlefield.
And it's not just Trump administration officials. We're now up to 2 cabinet-level officials who are stepping down, but they are not alone. After the violent security breach, we've now seen that the chief of Capitol Police and the Senate Sergeant of Arms are also stepping down. Back to you, Doreen and Jim.
All right, Alice Barr. Alice, thank you. Tonight, multiple law enforcement agencies are sorting through a trove of high-quality pictures from the Capitol and hoping to track down suspects. D.C. police received several pictures today, and they released these photos, and they have more on their website. The FBI's Washington field office tonight says they've also received more than 4,000 tips. Today, D.C.'s police chief said investigators are actively looking for these individuals.
As we speak, we have members of the Metropolitan Police Department that are scouring the area hotels, businesses, etc., trying to identify some of these individuals that still may be taking up residence within our city.
You can report any tips directly to D.C. police, and they will share information with the FBI. Doreen?
As police search for suspects tonight, some of the people arrested at the Capitol yesterday have already had their day in court. Here are sketches from D.C. Superior Court today showing 18 of the suspects already facing charges. Late into the night, the Justice Department has been filing federal charges against others believed to be responsible for crimes at the Capitol. At least 15 new cases, some with particularly troubling details. Scott McFarland has been tracking those developments for us tonight, and he joins us from home with the latest. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Doreen, good evening. In one of the cases announced by the Justice Department, they say a man had 11 Molotov cocktails and was ready to use them. In another case, they say a man with body armor had a loaded handgun and more ammo on his person. There were several unlawful entry cases, more firearms cases, and also the Justice Department told us a large number of pilfering cases. The potential that records and equipment was stolen from the Capitol grounds and that there is national security concern because of it.
Condolences continue to pour in from rank and file as there is more fallout inside the top ranks of law enforcement at the Capitol. It comes as the district is now trying to clamp down on demonstrations planned for Inauguration Day. We've got team coverage for you tonight. News 4's Darcy Spencer standing by with the mayor's plan. But we're going to start with Scott McFarland, who broke news of more changes inside the Capitol Police Department. Scott, what can you tell us?
Hey, Corey, good evening. Let's begin with what the Capitol Police Union told us about Howie Ledengood. Said he was a selfless servant of the U.S. Capitol Police Department and said the agency right now is just reeling. It's lost 2 officers this week, both of whom were responding to the January 6th chaos, but also 60 more of the officers were injured and countless more have just been traumatized by all of this horror. In the meantime, there are changes at the top of the department. Police Chief Stephen Sund of U.S. Capitol Police said he was going to resign January 16th. That would be Saturday. We've learned he's gone now. A new acting chief has taken over. We have her name. It's Ananda Pittman. She's a veteran of the department. She's been there since 2001. She's the first African-American woman to be a commander at the department. She's a Morgan State grad. She's local. She'll take over that department on an acting basis. What's more, there are changes at the U.S. Capitol Police Board, which oversees security on the Hill. Chief Pittman will join that, so will a new acting Senate Sergeant at Arms. A lot of overhauls going on as the weekend progresses. We know internally the Senate Rules Committee and the House Appropriations Committee have both launched investigations into what went wrong Wednesday, what mistakes were made in a security nature at the Hill Wednesday. Those reviews tend to take weeks, if not months, but a spokesman for the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, which represents a lot of federal law enforcement, says they want it done within 45 days to make sure whatever vulnerabilities are there are fixed.
We start with Scott McFarland and the breaking news from the Department of Justice. Scott.
Hey, Pat and Sean, good afternoon. The Justice Department says already 70 people are charged with crimes in connection to last Wednesday, but that there'll be an order of magnitude. Those numbers will be growing. The FBI and the top prosecutor here in D.C. spoke to cameras. They said the charges that are still to come will likely include sedition and felony murder for this horror, which has killed at least 5 people so far. In that press conference late today, the Justice Department made several other revelations. They specified the 2 pipe bombs found on the Hill January 6th were real. They had timers and they had explosive igniters. And they say they've received 100,000 tips so far and are making arrests nationwide.
The brutality the American people watched with shock and disbelief on the 6th will not be tolerated by the FBI. The men and women of the FBI will leave no stone unturned in this investigation.
A few more updates into News 4 just a few moments ago. A man named Lonnie Kaufman. He's the one accused of bringing 11 Molotov cocktails to Capitol Hill last Wednesday. He's in court right now. The feds are trying to keep him in custody pending the next hearing in his case. One other thing, the FBI specified cases involving what they call the zip tie guy. The man allegedly brings zip ties into the Senate chamber. They say his case may be minor in comparison to the ones they're still to bring.
The Justice Department filed a series of new cases today and says that many more are coming. Scott McFarland's been breaking news of many of these arrests in our NBC Washington app, and he's joining us now live from home with the very latest. Scott?
Yeah, Leon, good afternoon. The top federal prosecutor in the district says a growing number of people arrested are either current or former law enforcement. That includes 2 Southwest Virginia police officers arrested. But let me begin giving you the latest arrest that happened just today. Starting with a Texas woman whom the feds say took a private plane to the January 6th protests. The feds say they have social media images and video of her saying she was storming the Capitol and that TV media studios would be targeted next. Also just filed charges against Dominic Pizzola. His nickname is Spaz, the feds say. Investigators say Pizzola was among the first wave of people to approach that solitary police officer near the U.S. Senate floor. They say he was a known subject by the FBI. Also under arrest, Matthew Bledsoe. Bledsoe's charging documents just received by News 4. According to investigators, Bledsoe unlawfully entered the Capitol, saying, quote, "This is our house." Among the pieces of evidence they've cited, a Facebook post by his wife in which she says Bledsoe was in the Capitol January 6th. We were trying to reach defense lawyers for all 3 of those. But these are just the latest of at least 100 arrests since January 6th, and nearly 200 more case files have been opened. What's more, the feds say they've already found cooperators among those arrested, which could mean defendants are flipping and turning in other suspects to the FBI. Meanwhile, members of Congress have asked Capitol Police to investigate whether their own colleagues gave some of the rioters tours of the Capitol complex in the days before the insurrection, which would have given the rioters some advanced knowledge of the winding halls and tunnels on the Hill. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was asked about this at a press conference today.
If, in fact, it is found that members of Congress were accomplices to this insurrection, if they aided and abetted the crime, there may have to be actions taken beyond the Congress.
One growing sign of mistrust between members of Congress, they've added metal detectors outside the House chamber for the first time in memory. And the top Democrat on the House Financial Services Committee tells News 4 she doesn't feel safe on the Hill right now and won't feel safe at the inauguration next week.
2 men charged with assaulting a U.S. Capitol police officer on January 6th are now in custody.
That officer, Brian Sicknick, later died following that insurrection. Scott McFarland joins us. He's at the live desk with the latest on these arrests.
Hey, Sean and Wendy, both of those men just appeared in court to face the assault charges. Julian Cater of State College, Pennsylvania, arrested after getting off a plane in Newark. And George Tanyos of Morgantown, West Virginia, he was arrested near his home. The feds say they went after police with bear spray at the Capitol January 6th, and judges have just ordered both men held in pretrial detention pending their next hearings. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick from Virginia died shortly after the insurrection. Coroner has not released the official cause of death, but court filings say he was hit by bear spray. Those filings showed these images of Tanyos and Caton, feds say, carrying a can of bear spray. And they show them in close proximity to officers on the front lines that day. Here are the other notable details in filings today from the U.S. Justice Department in this case. 3 police officers, Brian Sicknick included, were temporarily blinded by the bear spray assault. The assault allegedly occurred from about 5 feet away, and video of it was captured by police body cameras and surveillance cameras. These arrests, the latest in nearly 300 cases stemming from January 6, with the potential for 100 more, if not hundreds more, still to come. And just a moment ago, this statement from U.S. Capitol Police about the arrest today. It says those who perpetrated these heinous crimes must be held accountable. And let me be clear, the unlawful actions will not be tolerated by the Capitol Police Department.
Only on 4 tonight, new images released today of the alleged attack of a Prince George's County man at the U.S. Capitol insurrection.
Now, you may find the videos you're seeing here disturbing. The courts use them as evidence to consider whether to hold that man in custody pending trial.
Again, that man from Prince George's, Maryland. Today, the Justice Department released them to our Scott McFarland and the News 4 I-team. And Scott joins us now live from the newsroom to take us through this. Scott?
Hey, Sean and Jim, Emmanuel Jackson is from Capitol Heights. He's about 19 years old, and federal prosecutors say it's Jackson swinging a baseball bat at police on the front lines during the insurrection. You can hear the roar and shouts of the rioters as they try to confront police and get inside the Capitol. According to the Justice Department and a judge's order, that's Emmanuel Jackson of Maryland swinging a baseball bat at the officers and their shields. Others are swinging items too as police try to hold the line. From a different angle, you can see how close the accused appears to be to the officers, bat in hand. Jackson surrendered to police just days after the insurrection. A judge initially ordered him held in custody pending trial, citing these images in these videos as part of his rationale. Social media videos prosecutors say are of Jackson were also presented to the judge.
So why are you here right now? What are you doing here? Fighting for America. Fighting for America? We've been taken over by globalists.
Last week, after an appeal from Jackson's attorneys, the judge allowed Jackson to be released on supervision. The videos had not been made public, but News 4 filed a formal request with the chief judge of the D.C. federal court to release the video of this local defendant. Jackson's defense attorneys asked the videos remain sealed, but the judge disagreed and ordered they be handed over promptly to News 4. Jackson's attorney declined comment. He's scheduled for a preliminary hearing in early April on federal charges of assaulting police. Those are not the only videos released today by the Justice Department. The FBI is still seeking tips, and they released a series of other videos of alleged insurrectionists. In some of the footage, you see others allegedly swinging items at police officers amid the chaos. At least 300 people have been charged so far, but these videos indicate there could be many more arrests to come. Back to the Emmanuel Jackson case. In one of the videos released by the court today, Jackson appears to say that he was protesting the election on January 6th. Then when asked, he says he didn't vote in the election.
There is a scathing new review of the U.S. Capitol Police and how they handled the January 6th insurrection. The 100-page report from the Capitol Police Inspector General said the agency ignored warnings and was not properly equipped before those riots. It also offers a series of recommended changes. News 4's Scott McFarland is in the newsroom now with the latest. Scott, that report shed some new light on some of the failures from that day.
Yeah, Sean, a House committee will hear testimony tomorrow about the failures of police leadership in the hours before the insurrection, and they'll really drill down into that newly released investigation. Here's what we see as the most striking findings so far. It found 3 days before the riots, the Capitol Police Intelligence Unit warned some Trump supporters were planning to target Congress and were actively promoting violence. Found Homeland Security officials had warned police they'd spotted a map of the Capitol Hill tunnel system circulating online days before the insurrection. Yet the report found police leaders did not report or order more aggressive force from their officers, didn't have proper munitions with them, had protective gear that was beyond its shelf life, and was using riot shields that were improperly stored, weathered, and broke down in some cases on the front lines. The review also cites a lack of training and manpower in the police department's riot team. And the investigation confirms what the new acting Capitol Police chief told members of Congress last month, that requests for National Guard help were at first rejected that day and later delayed that day, January 6th. The acting police chief told Congress new equipment has since been ordered and that officers fought valiantly that day.
Those officers that were on the front lines on January 6th fought with everything they had. We are internally forever grateful for them. They are our heroes. We know that because of them, that electoral vote process was able to continue.
That was her testimony last month. In response to today's internal review, the head of the Capitol Police Officers Union told News 4 these are issues and concerns the union's been addressing for years. None of these chiefs, including the assistant chiefs and deputy chiefs, have done anything to correct the problems. The officers are left there high and dry. The Capitol Police chief resigned soon after the January 6th insurrection, but has said his calls for help once the insurrection began were ignored or acted on too slowly. The former House and Senate sergeants at arms have also stepped aside after the riots. The Inspector General of the Capitol Police testifies tomorrow about what else he found and what he's recommending to better prepare for future emergencies. We're told that'll include calls for more training and better tracking of police supplies.
Prosecutors have now secured their first guilty plea in the U.S. Capitol insurrection. An Indiana man linked to the far-right Oath Keepers group entered his plea today in federal court. Scott McFarland broke the news and joins us live from home with the very latest. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Sean, good evening. His name is John Schaefer from Fort Wayne, Indiana. He's the guitarist in a heavy metal band named Iced Earth, but when he entered his guilty pleas today, he was whispering in the softest of voices. Police say he was on the front lines of the insurrection and made police retreat that day. Here are the two guilty pleas: obstructing an official proceeding and entering and remaining in a restricted building while carrying a dangerous weapon. That would be bear spray. Schaefer has agreed to fully cooperate with the Justice Department's investigation of this insurrection, which means he could be providing information on other defendants, other people charged that day. And the feds will consider whether to give him extra witness security as he does so. By pleading guilty, Schaefer is being released from jail pending sentencing, and sentencing could be a while. He likely will remain out of jail as he helps the feds build their cases. This is the first guilty plea, which means Schaefer might have landed one of the better deals the Justice Department will offer insurrectionists. Schaefer admitted today in court he is a member of the Oath Keepers, a far-right group, many of whom were accused of being in the Capitol that day. And here's what's important. Other Oath Keepers face the most serious charges: conspiracy, organizing the insurrection, and keeping weapons outside the D.C. limits for a possible second wave.
Breaking tonight, a long-awaited ruling from the D.C. medical examiner. He just announced the cause of death for fallen U.S. Capitol Police officer Brian Sicknick was a stroke, which the medical examiner classifies as natural causes. News 4's Scott McFarland joined us live from home to explain. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Sean, good evening. We were hoping to get some answers. We've been awaiting this ruling for quite some time about the death of Officer Sicknick. We got some answers. Here's what we know. The feds have told us he was assaulted during the insurrection. He died the night after. He was struck with chemical spray in the face. He and other officers were temporarily blinded that day and ultimately overwhelmed while on the front lines. We also know that Officer Sicknick, according to the medical examiner tonight, died of natural causes, died of multiple strokes that ended up causing his death. The medical examiner makes clear these are natural causes, not a homicide. We know there are two men formerly accused of assaulting Officer Sicknick January 6th, George Tanyos of Morgantown, West Virginia, and Julian Cater of State College, Pennsylvania. Both have pleaded not guilty. Both appear in court next Tuesday morning, we're told, to argue for their release from jail as they await trial in this case. The Capitol Police have just issued a statement saying, quote, the U.S. Capitol Police accepts the findings from the D.C. Office of the Chief Medical Examiner that Officer Sicknick died of natural causes. This does not change the fact that Officer Sicknick died in the line of duty, the police say, courageously defending Congress and defending the Capitol. The department continues to mourn the loss of our beloved colleague. Officer Brian Sicknick died of natural causes, multiple strokes, according to the medical examiner. Always worth being mindful of the fact that at least two other officers, one Capitol Police officer, one D.C. police officer, died from suicide in the days after.
Newly released video shows the attack against fallen U.S. Capitol Police officer Brian Sicknick. It also shows an attack against a D.C. police officer who was briefly blinded while on the front lines at the Capitol on January 6th. News 4 was among several media outlets to petition for access to this video. And tonight, Scott McFarland shows us what it captured, and he has updates on the criminal cases against those accused.
It's been nearly 4 months since the attack on this complex, but we are still getting new images showing the ferocity and the brutality on the front lines that day. A court has just ordered the release of this body camera footage from January 6th. First, let me show you the aftermath. In the blue coat, that's fallen Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, appearing to be overcome from chemical spray. Moments earlier, in a slowed-down clip of video, prosecutors say Julian Cater is on the front lines as Cater directs the spray at Officer Sicknick and at least 2 other officers. Sicknick moves away from the scene as another altercation breaks out. The medical examiner ruled he died of natural causes, of multiple strokes, but the Justice Department says he was overwhelmed by that spray that day. In another clip, the feds say George Tanios and Cater are seen walking and talking about when to deploy spray. They both pleaded not guilty and are in jail till their next hearing in May. Another clip of this newly released video shows another Capitol Police officer appearing disoriented and unable to see after the attack, as a fellow officer helps her wash her eyes and guide her away from the danger. For prosecutors, these videos are crucial evidence because the outnumbered police were unable to make many arrests on site January 6th.
They are relying on surveillance video, on electronic communications, on cell phone and cell site information to try to build a case proving, who did what at the Capitol that day.
News 4 had to file legal motions in West Virginia, where George Tanios was first charged, and here in D.C. to get access to these videos. The Justice Department didn't object to releasing them legally, but is just flooded with cases and with evidence. Thousands of images, phones, 250,000 tips, and so far at least 404 criminal defendants.
Chaos in the courtroom for a defendant charged in the U.S. Capitol riots, and an unorthodox request from another. Our Scott McFarland is covering the fallout tonight and the criminal cases now arising from the insurrection.
4 months since the January 6th insurrection, and prosecutors have been clear this is going to be one of the, if not the largest criminal investigation in U.S. history. More than 400 defendants already, and just in the initial stages, we're seeing complications. Let's begin with the case of Daniel Egvet of Maryland. He's accused of assaulting police at the Capitol January 6th. A judge allowed him to be released from jail pending trial, but for days now, the court has failed to find a GPS tracking device that works in his rural community in far western Maryland. Might have to order him back to jail if they can't figure it out this weekend. A much larger episode in the court case of Landon Copeland of rural Utah. During his court appearance, Copeland became unruly. He was screaming vulgarities at the judge, yelling he wanted a delay in his hearing and saying he was a veteran and that the court owes him that, and that no one will be able to take him into custody unless he allows it. The judge says she'll consider whether to allow Copeland to remain free from jail in the coming days. A court official tells us they brought in more help, more prosecutors and more federal public defenders to handle this crush of cases in D.C. federal court from the insurrection. Virginia Democratic Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, who was trapped in the upper level of the House chamber January 6th, says these criminal cases are critically important and just beginning.
The scale and scope of it is so enormous that people are thinking, oh, it was just a day. Well, no, it's not just a day. It's thousands upon thousands of work hours for law enforcement across the country, FBI, state police, local police.
One other note, Eric Munchell, the Tennessee man accused of having those zip tie handcuffs inside the Senate chamber January 6th, has made an unorthodox request to the court. He was arrested along with his mother that day and is on home detention under orders not to contact any other January 6th defendant. He's asked the court for permission to call his mom on Mother's Day.
There are new details as lawmakers work to increase security at the U.S. Capitol.
Tens of millions of dollars for D.C. police and Homeland Security workers hangs in the balance in this sweeping plan.
Scott McFarland covers the Hill and has the very latest.
Later this week, the U.S. House takes a big vote on a bill with a big price tag. $2 billion in security enhancements for the Capitol, a direct response to January 6th. The question is, will it or will it not include tens of millions of dollars for the D.C. government to reimburse the D.C. government for its costs for police and Homeland Security in this area? Here's what we know it will include. Millions of dollars for stronger, harder windows and doors, for a new pop-up temporary fencing, for new cameras, both on the buildings and on Capitol police officers who don't wear body cameras right now. Question is, what's up with the D.C. money? I'm told there will be a Republican amendment to strip all money from the District of Columbia in this bill. It's one of those political wedge issues, but not the only one on this big bill.
I don't know the exact amount that they need to spend, but I am confident that there needs to be more after what we saw on January 6th. And since I was on the House Administration Committee that provided funding for the police, I was always asking them, are you secure enough? Do we need to do more?
Also later this week, the House will vote on whether to create a January 6th commission to review failures ahead of the insurrection and during the insurrection. If approved, they hope to have their final report by the end of this year.
A plan for an independent commission to investigate the Capitol insurrection has collapsed. Senators rejected it before leaving tonight for their holiday week recess. Scott McFarland is tracking this for us. He joins us live from home with more. Scott?
Hey, Leon, they needed 60 votes to have a debate on this bill. It means all 50 Democrats who announced their support and 10 Republicans. They fell about 5 votes short, so they couldn't get the votes on board. So the deal is off. It wasn't really a big surprise. There were predictions that this wouldn't pass muster on the procedural vote and become a Senate floor debate, but this is really a big blow for the many people who wanted an independent commission to investigate January 6th to prevent a future tragedy and to get to the bottom of this one. They wanted a commission similar to the 9/11 commission that formed after 2001. This commission, like that one, was going to be equally divided among Democrats and Republicans and feature members who are out of office, not the ones who are facing re-election. So what happens now? There are other congressional investigations, partisan congressional committee investigations. They're led by Democrats. They may result in findings that are deemed more political. There is, of course, the Justice Department investigation. 453 people charged in federal court, more than 460 total in the insurrection. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, though, Leon, says he does bring up the right and reserves the right to bring this bill back up for a new debate later in the year.
The insurrection at the Capitol was unprecedented. Multiple congressional investigations are now underway about how it all happened.
Yes, but concerns about the policies and transparency with Capitol Police now, that dates back years. Today, Scott McFarland and the News 4 I-team shed some light on a police force that has largely been operating in the dark.
He's one of the thousands who labor inside the U.S. Capitol each day, handling maintenance with the architect of the Capitol's office. So Ololade Odiale says he was surprised when he left work one night, got in the car, and got pulled over by Capitol Police.
I've never been humiliated in my life. I've never been disgraced, embarrassment.
Odiale says police told him there was a problem with his license plates.
He said, "Are you sure you work here?" I said, "This is my building right here. I work right here." Then he said, Nah. He handcuffed me.
He says they held him for 4 hours before letting him go. But Odiale can't let it go, saying he was mistreated and that months later he couldn't get a copy of the police report to clear his name.
I just want to report it. I want everybody to know what's going on.
Ryan Davis felt the same.
Officer comes out of nowhere with his gun drawn to my face.
The longtime Capitol worker says police drew their weapons when they say he failed to stop at an ID checkpoint last summer. His lawyer disputes the police account, but says for months the Capitol Police have refused to hand over surveillance video, which would prove it.
So there's security cameras everywhere, and there's evidence that would be dispositive of the issue.
Even an attorney can't just ask for the relevant video?
You can ask, but they're going to tell you no. That they withhold information and evidence very close to the vest, the U.S. Capitol Police.
For years, people on the Hill have credited the nearly 2,000 officers for their work on the front lines, but criticized the agency leadership for operating in the dark. Unlike your local police department, U.S. Capitol Police do not release reports or records. And in the first week and a half after the insurrection, they held no public briefings. They didn't speak with the News 4 I-team either.
I will tell you, we're having a hell of a time getting information from the Capitol Police.
Tim Ryan isn't just a U.S. congressman. He runs the powerful subcommittee that oversees and funds Capitol Police.
We, I think, deserve to know and understand what the hell is going on. And it's a black box over there.
Because the Capitol Police answer only to Congress, they don't have to follow many of the laws other police do, including the Freedom of Information Act. And because members of Congress come and go, so too does the pressure for change. But even before the recent riots at the U.S. Capitol, there have been concerns raised about access. including because of this man. Doug Hughes flew a gyrocopter from Florida, landing on the Capitol grounds back in 2015 as a political protest. Hughes says he warned police he was coming, yet seemed to catch them by surprise. A congressional committee ordered the U.S. Capitol Police chief at that time to appear at a hearing days later to explain. Hughes says police need to explain publicly how it failed this time, too.
I was astounded that they completely dropped the ball and left Congress exposed.
In each year since, Congress has boosted the police budget, including by another $54 million in 2021 to a total of nearly $500 million a year. Last summer, including language that police should do a better job of informing the public about major security incidents and any misconduct by officers. But just 2 weeks after it became law, the insurrection upended the Capitol.
Without a means to get information from them, there's no way for the public to have a check and balance on their police powers.
A police force now facing new cries for more transparency amid a security crisis that's led to new fencing and metal detectors at our nation's capital. Scott McFarland, News 4 IT.
1 month and 1 week after the U.S. Capitol insurrection, more than 200 people are facing charges in connection to this horror. But an investigation by the News 4 I team reveals most of those people are back home with family, even back at work as they await their day in court. As Scott McFarland reports tonight, the handling of these defendants is raising some questions and fueling perceptions of a double standard in who gets arrested and released.
When the terror ended and the tear gas faded, it came time for some of these faces to face justice. Aaron Mostovsky, who allegedly seized a U.S. Capitol Police shield and helmet during the riot. Larry Brock, who the feds say invaded the Capitol armed with zip ties. Then there's Matthew Capsule, who allegedly roughed up National Guardsmen. And Riley Williams, who prosecutors say stole a computer from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office with plans to sell it to Russia. They're among hundreds arrested after the insurrection. Some have pleaded not guilty, others awaiting their court date, but they were all set free to await trial back home. D.C. activist Ron Moten was kept in pretrial detention when he was arrested for selling drugs in the 90s. Moten believes race is a factor in why so many alleged insurrectionists are being released.
This is the root of institutionalized racism that many of us have been talking about for decades.
Jesse Ennis was kept in pretrial custody in 2008 before serving time for armed robbery in St. Mary's County. Now she works for the criminal justice nonprofit.
I can honestly say that if that was people of color, black people that had done that, the outcome would have been vastly different.
Our News 4 I-Team review of U.S. Justice Department and U.S. court records shows pretrial detention is increasing in America, up from 50% to 75% of all criminal cases in just recent years. But of the nearly 200 U.S. Capitol riot cases, we found about 15% of those arrested have been kept behind bars awaiting trial. So what is the difference in this case? Is it race? Is it the type of crime? Is it the money some of the defendants have? The News 4 I-Team wanted to know.
It's almost impossible to believe that race is not the driving factor.
Former Department of Justice official Jonathan Smith said the factors judges use to consider whom to hold in custody, like prior convictions, jobs, and housing status, or community ties, tend to favor white or more affluent people.
All of those factors weight very heavily in a racialized way because of other, economic and racial discrimination factors in our country.
But the I-Team found the feds had made it hard to know for sure. A review of federal justice reports of all crimes found pretrial detention is most common in drugs, firearms, and immigration violations, and that black and brown people are held at higher rates than whites. So we asked the Justice Department and the U.S. courts for racial disparity data and who gets detained for these types of charges: violent entry, assaulting police, and civil disorder. But they didn't provide it, nor is it easy to track.
You would think that we would have a plethora of data on people, in particular people that we as a government are responsible for because they are confined in our facilities.
Charisse Fano-Burdine runs the nonprofit Pretrial Justice Institute and says the courts don't track this the way they should.
It's almost one of those, if I don't count it, if I don't keep the track of it, maybe it's not a problem.
She suspects a racial disparity is happening, but doesn't think more people should be detained.
That treatment that we're seeing white people get is actually the treatment we're supposed to all be getting, which is a presumption of innocence.
The Justice Department declined multiple requests over the past 3 weeks for an interview about this issue or these cases.
There is growing concern tonight the U.S. Capitol insurrection was also a super spreader event. Tonight, Scott McFarland and our I-Team report on the increase of COVID cases and Guard members who were sick and quarantined far from home.
Many of the barricades are removed and more than 100 suspected insurrectionists are now being criminally charged. But for U.S. Capitol Police and National Guard protecting the Capitol, one risk is still growing. Quarantined to a room in a Crystal City hotel, a Virginia National Guard member is positive for COVID-19, symptomatic, alone, and nearly 100 miles from home.
The fact that so many of them are coming down with COVID, testing positive for COVID, and not having adequate medical supplies or medical care or nutrition, that's what concerns me.
His wife is bringing him care packages and keeps his spirits up. She asked we not show her face or use her name because her husband is not cleared to speak with media. You think some of this was avoidable, or some of this could have been prevented?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. The soldiers in close proximity to each other for so long. The fact that they are working very long shifts and they're very tired.
He's not alone. Her husband told her 20% of the 600 people in the Virginia Guard unit have now tested positive. In total, as many as 200 Guard members deployed to protect the district during and after the Capitol insurrection have tested positive for COVID-19. And a union official tells the News 4 I-Team at least 38 U.S. Capitol Police employees have tested positive just since January 6th. The protocols and social distancing they've been told to employ were just impossible to employ during a riot and assault.
So the fact that these men and women uprooted their lives, part of their job as Guard, means that we owe them an obligation to make sure that they're safe.
Their families worry Guard members were exposed while resting in less than ideal locations, like a parking garage or on the marble floors inside the Capitol complex.
As a military spouse, my heart broke.
Members of Congress say they've asked for better accommodations for the remaining Guard members to prevent further spread.
I can only hope lessons have been learned that since these troops are going to be here for another several months.
If they're going to continue to be deployed, some of them through March here at the Capitol, that they ought to be high on the priority list on getting vaccinations.
As for this Virginia wife, she knows her husband will remain alone for 2 weeks. She's worried about his health and the care he and others are getting while sick.
I just keep thinking, these men and women, they just deserve better. They really deserve better. They've given so much.
Meanwhile, Capitol Police officers tell the I-Team they're lobbying the agency for more vaccinations more quickly. They think they're still exposed, working in a complex with members of Congress who fly in regularly from all across the country.
And many are wondering if the president and others who encouraged the crowd beforehand will be facing any criminal charges.
D.C.'s Attorney General says that he is considering just that. Tonight, Jody Fleischer and the News 4 I-Team dig into how that could play out.
The U.S. attorney here in D.C. has not ruled out filing charges for inciting a riot, but he also hasn't committed to doing it. Enter the D.C. Attorney General, who says he's investigating too, even though his authority is limited only to misdemeanors.
Today is the day American patriots start taking down names and kicking. Let's have trial by combat.
Rallying calls like these now have critics calling for criminal charges.
Clearly, the crowd was hyped up, juiced up.
D.C. Attorney General Karl Racine says he's investigating those who contributed to that hype and turned the crowd's attention toward the Capitol, and whether the language used during that rally rises to the level of inciting violence, a criminal misdemeanor.
Those were outrageous comments that those individuals, including the President of the United States, made.
If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
If you don't fight in the face of glaring irregularities.
The incitement of violence law was passed about a decade ago in D.C., and in that time, the Attorney General's office has only brought about 20 cases using it.
Rather than calm them down or at least emphasize the peaceful nature of what protests need to be, they really did encourage these folks and riled them up.
Representative Hakeem Jeffries, who chairs the House Democratic Caucus, applauded Racine's efforts.
The reason why there were thousands of people who were riled up and whipped into a frenzy is because they actually believe Donald Trump. And this lie that the election was stolen from him, and so they came here to overthrow the government.
Racine is also reviewing whether a misdemeanor charge from his office might withstand the reach of a presidential pardon, since here in the district, local felony charges are handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office, and those are pardonable.
I would just expect that the D.C. Attorney General will follow the facts, apply the law, be guided by the Constitution, conduct a thorough investigation, and let the chips fall where they may.
Racine told me there is still more investigating to do, and he plans to coordinate with the U.S. Attorney's Office, current and possible future leadership, so as not to interfere with potentially more serious charges. Jody Fleischer, News 4 I-Team.
100 days after the January 6th siege, and the number of people charged with illegally entering the Capitol is growing quickly. At least 400 cases have already been filed, and more are likely to come. As Scott McFarlane and the News 4 I-Team report, the cases are coming so quickly, justice for the accused insurrectionists is likely to be very slow.
There are tens of thousands of pages of court filings submitted in the cases of the accused U.S. Capitol insurrectionists, but to get a sense of where these prosecutions stand 100 days after the riots, this one page in the case against accused Oath Keeper Jessica Watkins of Ohio speaks volumes. Prosecutors tell a judge they'll need extra time to make their case against her. Watkins, who's pleaded not guilty, faces the most serious charges: conspiracy, accused of organizing the attack and pushing into the Capitol in a military-style stack formation. But the feds acknowledge they're buried sifting through evidence from January 6th. 15,000 hours of surveillance video, 1,600 electronic devices reviewed, and 250,000 tips to review. Requiring months, not weeks, says Seamus Hughes, a researcher on extremist cases at George Washington University.
They normally don't get as many tips from the public, right? And they've got to wade through that. They've got body camera video they have to go through. They have videos from online and other tips like that. I mean, this is a type of information where everyone threw as much information to the FBI as humanly possible, and they've got to go through all of that.
And there's another complication. Nearly all of these insurrection cases are being funneled through just one courthouse, the D.C. Federal Court near the Capitol. Records obtained by News 4 show in just the first 3 months of this year, the courts and its judges have handled the filings of nearly as many criminal cases and defendants as they did in all of 2020. Also being strained, the Federal Public Defender's Office, which is representing many of the accused. We've learned the 9 attorneys there are handling at least 100 cases, and they're asking for extra help from defense lawyers elsewhere in the country.
For some of these defendants, the overflow of cases and the reduction of operations at the courthouse due to COVID-19 could lead to some very long waits.
You've got more than a year's worth of cases flowing through the system in one chunk.
David Benowitz is a defense attorney who handles federal cases, and he says the waits could slow the handling of some other D.C. criminal cases in that courthouse and exact some pain for the defendants who are being held in jail till trial.
You're held without bond, and that in and of itself is a horrific experience. And it's still during a pandemic where not everyone is vaccinated inside the facility.
Some defendants have cited these long waits as reason to be released from jail pending trial. Thomas Caldwell, an accused Oath Keeper from Berryville, Virginia, and Riley Williams, the Pennsylvania woman accused of stealing a computer from Nancy Pelosi's office that day, have both secured release from custody. They've pleaded not guilty, but will have to wait at least until late May for their next hearings, with no estimate about when a jury trial is even possible. For those who want people held accountable for January 6th, 100 days in, there's been quick action, but there will be no quick resolutions.
Prosecutors say they'll ask a judge to hold a high-profile defendant in the Capitol insurrection in jail pending trial. Landon Copeland had a court hearing today, 48 hours after giving an exclusive jailhouse phone interview to News 4. Scott McFarlane has the update now from Capitol Hill.
The case against Landon Copeland is in its earliest stages in federal court. He has yet to even enter a not guilty plea. Today, a judge ordered a competency exam. They're awaiting the results of that exam before moving forward. Despite all that, he was willing to speak on the record about the charges against him. When he got access to a phone at his lockup in Utah, U.S. Capitol riot defendant Landon Copeland called to talk about his case.
I don't think I committed a crime. I didn't, I have the capability to where I could have hurt those other individuals, but I didn't hurt them.
He faces among the most serious charges, assault on police, accused of taking a police riot shield and pushing over an officer January 6th.
I didn't hurt him. One of them pushed me, I pushed him back. One of them pushed me with the riot shield, I took his riot shield from him. One of them hit me with a baton, and I took his baton from him.
But they're police.
I don't feel like I did anything wrong. I was not in a place that I was not allowed to be. There was no signs that said authorized personnel only. There was no barriers.
Copeland told me he skipped Donald Trump's speech that day to make a fast food run with his girlfriend, but acknowledges being at the Capitol after, and explained why he went.
The idea was to confront our lawmakers. The idea was to try and have a voice and try and speak for people and just be like, we're not getting what we want from our lawmakers.
Copeland is among the highest profile defendants in the insurrection because of an outburst at a hearing of his in May. I was in attendance and heard what was described in the court transcript. He screamed expletives at the judge and called her a robot.
Well, I imagine that I probably did make it harder for myself.
Over the weekend on MSNBC, some of the Democrats who led Donald Trump's impeachment trials reacted to our interview and what Copeland said.
It is shocking to listen to, but my impression, after January 6th, I remember watching some of these insurrectionists in airports harassing some of my colleagues. And I remember thinking to myself, these people are true believers.
He did not have an attorney present when he made that phone call from the jailhouse, and his attorney did not respond to requests for comment. He'll likely be back in court in D.C. later this month.
Only on News 4, we're hearing from the longtime girlfriend and partner of fallen U.S. Capitol Police officer Brian Sicknick. She spoke to Scott McFarlane about the man she loved and the battle she is still fighting on his behalf. Scott?
Hey, Sean and Jim, good evening. I tell you, every day since January 6th has been a challenge for Sandra Garza, the girlfriend of Officer Brian Sicknick. Been a challenge for quite a while. And when we sat down with her, she gave us a glimpse into a different side of Sicknick than we've heard or seen before, and described how that day has been a months-long battle that she is still fighting. Sandra Garza says she met her best friend and boyfriend of 11 years online, just as he was joining U.S. Capitol Police.
He made everyone feel comfortable and safe, I guess is the best word. He just was very warm, gentle.
They shared a military background, and she says Brian Sicknick, a World War II buff brimming with patriotism, wanted to keep serving the nation.
He loved his job. He had a lot of pride in that.
As the chaos began January 6th, she and Sicknick texted and took that as reassurance he was safe as she headed to his house to feed the dogs they'd shared together when they lived together.
So I actually was 5 minutes from the house when I received a phone call.
Another Capitol Police employee told her Sicknick had suffered an emergency. With a police escort, she raced to the hospital in Washington, D.C., but would soon realize it was too late.
We did not get to hold his hand or say goodbye.
COVID restrictions limited access to her and his family.
It was very hard to not be able to see him and say goodbye, and it's just horrible. It's something that nobody should ever have to go through.
The medical examiner ruled Sicknick died of natural causes, suffering 2 strokes after the insurrection. According to prosecutors, some in the mob sprayed him with a heavy dose of chemical spray, overwhelming him. There is video of the attack, and Sandra says it took her months to bring herself to watch any of the images of the mob.
You didn't want to see video of that insurrection?
No, I did not. I had heard so many horrible things about it. And also I was afraid of seeing him in any of the footage.
But she has been seeing quite a bit of the Capitol. Along with some of Sicknick's colleagues and mother, she visited senators urging they support an independent January 6th commission.
The anger is driving me to take action for Brian. It's how I'm coping with it.
But there weren't enough votes. She says some senators gave her the brush off. Others refused to meet.
What would they say to you? How would they tell you no?
Well, some of them would say that they felt it was very partisan, it was one-sided, and that's why they couldn't vote yes for it.
She hopes House leaders plow ahead with their own review to get answers about why the National Guard was so late to respond that day, and what gave rise to such horror. How so many, including former members of the military, could turn on their country.
I wish that he could have had a much more peaceful last moments on this earth. And it hurts me a lot that he didn't get that. And knowing that, my gosh, his own fellow Americans were doing this. That's the worst part about it all, too.
Two of the nearly 500 defendants are specifically charged with assaulting Officer Sicknick. They've been ordered jailed until trial, and they've already spent a few months behind bars. But they've also appealed the judge's decision to jail them to the Court of Appeals, and I'm told they'll make their arguments for release June 25th.